Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 63. The End of an Era. After they geared up, they set out to meet Eraser at their usual place, but halfway through their way out of the warehouse district, they heard someone walking around. They were going to ignore it and continue on their way until they remembered Monday, when they overheard people walking around lost or looking for someone, and the other night, when they saw those two random people milling about at damn near 4 a.m. And now this? Twice was a coincidence, but 3 times? That was a trend that they very much did not care for. They trailed after the man in the shadows for a while, but he wasn't doing anything. He was just walking around. Was he scoping the place? Who was he? He was poking around windows and jiggling doorknobs and peering into places. Was someone seriously trying to set up shop here again? Hadn't these people learned their lesson? Fool me once, fool me twice, and all that? Their suspicions were given credence as he followed the man over to Block 8 and watched as he entered the warehouse that the gang had been squatting in for ages. Dang it. They felt their phone vibrate in their pocket. Eraserhead. You're late. Oh, crap, they were. Ivy. Ran into something. On my way. Could they not have a moment's respite? Of course you ran into an incident before we even started patrol. I'm surprised this is the first time it's happened. What was the situation? Anything we need to be concerned about? He asked nonchalant as possible in an attempt to mask his genuine concern. He didn't like them running into trouble on their own. Hell, he didn't even like roaming around the streets alone right now. They probably had a dozen hits on their heads each. If Ivy knew what was good for them, they'd lay low for a while, but unfortunately, Ivy did know what was good for them and insisted on doing the opposite daily. Yes, actually, there was some guy. I didn't recognize him. He was roaming around the warehouse district, scoping the place or something, and I tailed him all the way back to Block 8. I don't know what they're up to, but I've been keeping an eye on the area, and he's not the first person I've seen. There's been at least 4 other people, but 2 of them were together. I don't know if they're all connected, but it's not painting a good picture. They responded curtly. Shota let out a long-suffering sigh at the news. So what are we going to do about it? They haven't done anything yet. We can't arrest them for walking around. They'd get a fine for trespassing at best, and I don't think we need to piss them off any more than we already have. Ivy looked to be quite frustrated as they thought. After a while, with no suggestions, he decided to give his 2 cents. The streets have been quiet lately. They're still recouping their losses. Do you want to spend patrol in the warehouse district? See if there's anything to be seen? The furrow in their brow only deepened at his suggestion. Sit down, kid. You can eat and think at the same time. They shot him a look for that, but sat down regardless. Once they'd finished eating their meals in silence, Ivy answered his questions. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but we're not leaving each other's sight. That was strange. Usually he was the one being overly insistent on their safety. Sounds like a good call. I've got stuff to do tomorrow, so I don't have the time to die at the moment, he quipped back. Ivy just rolled their eyes. The warehouse district was quiet, and it was rare that any of the buildings exceeded 2 stories tall, so getting on the roof didn't provide much of a vantage point to look over the sea of buildings of the exact same height. And furthermore, he didn't trust the structural integrity of half of them. So the night was turning out to be more of a leisurely stroll in the shadows than anything else. The nights had been dull since the impromptu raid last Sunday. Not that he was complaining, but it was getting rather boring. Unfortunately, the change in scenery wasn't much less boring. These people you saw, Were they milling around the same areas, or was it spread out? He asked. Mostly toward the border of warehouses and uptown, but one of them was further in. So there wasn't much of a pattern, no. Ivy responded quietly. He hummed in response and let silence fall over the two of them again. There wasn't much to be seen. Ivy steered him away from a few places where they knew people camped out in, but they kept an ear out as they passed, and there was nothing of note. The only signs of life he'd seen was the occasional rat. Didn't you say there was a cat that lived here? He asked. He was admittedly getting very bored. They'd been walking around for hours, and there was a whole lot of nothing going on. He was starting to understand why Ivy never bothered to add this part of the district to their patrols, even though there was a history of people setting up shop here. A cat? Yeah, why? They asked a little nervously. That was strange. Bored, he replied honestly. They snickered a bit at that. Yeah, same. You like cats? He simply hummed in the affirmative. You have any? They asked. Yeah, I got two, Bastard and Kimchi. They laughed at him again, no doubt because of the first name. If you met him, you'd agree that there's no other name for him. He's Bastard, incarnate. All right. What about Kimchi then? Why Kimchi? They asked. He smiled at the memory of when he and Zashi found her in an alley one night when they'd been coaxed out, probably by Nem. She was sitting next to a dumpster covered in something. To this day, he still has no idea what it was, but it smelled absolutely foul, and she was just a little baby. They took her home and washed her off, but she still stank for a solid week and a half. 'Cause she's stinky, but we love her anyway, he replied with a small smile. Aww, Ivy cooed dramatically. They fell back into silence for a bit before Ivy spoke up again. Okay, I'll show you the cat. I call her DJ, 'cause, well, you'll see, they said with a mischievous giggle. She's this big old fluffy thing, like massive. I swear she must weigh over 20 pounds. I think she's part lion or something, they mused. They adjusted their route to the west and kept their eyes peeled. He was not looking forward to the rest of the night, but the short cat respite would have to be enough to push him through. 20 minutes of walking later, Ivy shushed him, even though he wasn't talking, and pointed around the corner of a structure that could only still be called a building by the most generous of definitions. Rounding the corner, he didn't see much in the low light. There was a dumpster with something lying at the foot of it, but he couldn't make it out, especially with Ivy shoving him out of their way as they ran forward. He was confused for a moment until he saw them collapse to their knees in front of the mass on the ground. Oh. Ivy was frantically checking it over as he walked up behind them. It was the cat, and it was lying motionless in a pool of blood. He could hear Ivy's shortened and panicked breaths as they put pressure on its abdomen and searched around its neck for a pulse. They were muttering under their breath, and it took him a second to realize they were chanting the word no over and over again. The cat was dead. It was clearly dead. Blood was no longer flowing from the wound, and it was completely motionless. There was no rise and fall to its chest, but Ivy seemed to be in denial. Kid, it's dead. No, she can't. I just saw her before. She was fine, they insisted, sounding a touch hysterical. They had come across bodies on their patrol before, but the kid had never reacted like this. They were always so clinical about it. They always had a touch of sadness to their tone and always soured their mood for the night, if not the days following, but they had never panicked. No, they were always so calm and resigned about it, like it was something they were accustomed to. He gently laid a hand on their shoulder and tried to guide them back away from the cat, Kami only knew what kinds of diseases it carried. They really shouldn't be touching it at all. Even if they were familiar with it, a stray was a stray. They only half turned their body to smack his hand away with a far more force than necessary. They reached behind themselves blindly to do it, not once taking their eyes off the cat. He was about to talk again, about to tell the kid she was gone, when they froze. Their frantic hands stilled, and they sat stock still for a second or two before they stood and turned to him. He expected tears. He expected grief, but their expression was neutral, completely blank. Their eyes weren't even glassy. No, they looked like nothing, like a doll, completely lifeless. Ivy? He asked cautiously. Their eyes lifted to meet his own, and it sent a chill down his spine. I doubt there's anything to see around here, but you can finish the patrol if you want. I need to take care of this. They responded, and their voice was just as off-putting as their eyes. It didn't shake or waver. It didn't have any of its usual bounce to it. It was completely monotone. Kid, are you sure you... Yes, you can go. They cut off his question before he even had the chance to ask it. He was frozen where he stood. He didn't know what to do. He didn't have the faintest idea. It wasn't often that he had no clue what to do, but it had been happening more and more since he'd met Ivy. The last year had been nonstop with him floundering with them. He thought he'd finally reached a point where he didn't feel so clueless, but apparently not. Please go, they added in the same nothing tone after he didn't leave. Their gaze shifted to something almost angry, but still too lifeless to be anything concrete. He didn't want to leave them like this, but he wasn't sure if that was for his own comfort or theirs. He knew they didn't like to show their emotions to him. He understood that. He wasn't the best at being vulnerable either, but that cat clearly meant something to them. They were grieving, or at least they would be once he left. If he stayed, they would just continue to shut down, but if he left, they would be alone with their grief, and that didn't feel right either. He couldn't stay forever, though. Staying here only pushed off the inevitable. Okay, I'll go. Just let me know if you need anything. I'll be around, okay? He'd stick around and finish out the patrol. It probably wasn't the safest idea, but there really weren't any signs of life anywhere, and he wanted to be there if they needed him. They nodded stiffly at him in response and stood in place watching him until he was out of sight. Kami, that was creepy. He felt like an a-hole for even thinking it, but it was. It reminded him of the first time they sparred, and the kid went from having a flashback to completely normal at the drop of a hat. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. The way they shifted on a dime was something straight out of the uncanny valley. He'd check in with them later, text them or something. Right now, they needed time. End of chapter.